In a world where the truth is often buried beneath layers of power and corruption, one woman dares to uncover it. Alexis Monroe has spent years carrying the weight of a shattered past. Her father, a man of unyielding integrity, was wrongfully convicted and lost his life in a broken system that protects the powerful and silences the vulnerable. But Alexis is no longer willing to stay silent. Armed with explosive evidence that could bring down a corrupt empire, Alexis steps into a fight that will test her resolve, her courage, and her trust in others. Along the way, she encounters unexpected allies: a fearless paralegal, a retired journalist, a reluctant whistleblower, each bringing their own struggles and strengths to her cause. As the walls close in and the stakes rise, Alexis faces relentless threats, racial prejudice, and a system designed to intimidate those who seek justice. Yet, through it all, she discovers the transformative power of unity and the extraordinary strength found in acts of kindness and courage. Will Alexis's pursuit of justice succeed, or will the forces against her prove too powerful to overcome? The morning sun crept over the skyline as Alexis Monroe sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her Mustang GT, a car she had worked tirelessly to afford, gleamed in the morning light. The car was her symbol of perseverance, a testament to the countless hours she spent working late shifts, ignoring the whispers and doubts of those who thought she would never succeed. Yet today, the weight of her next decision threatened to crush her. On the passenger seat lay a sealed envelope. Its contents were explosive evidence of a corrupt network responsible for her father's wrongful conviction. Alexis's father, Thomas Monroe, had been her hero, a man of unshakable integrity who believed in the justice system even as it failed him. His imprisonment had shattered their family, and his death in custody was a wound that never healed. This envelope, the product of years of digging and quiet determination, held the power to clear his name. But it also put her in grave danger. "Am I really ready for this?" Alexis whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the car engine. She stared at the envelope, her mind a storm of doubt. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked tired, dark circles under her eyes and a face hardened by years of struggle. Taking a deep breath, she pulled into the parking lot of a pristine office building. The law firm inside had the resources to take down the powerful figures implicated in her evidence. She hoped they also had the courage. Just as she parked, the wail of a siren broke the stillness. Alexis froze as a patrol car pulled in behind her. Her chest tightened, her pulse racing. A tall white officer stepped out, adjusting his belt with a swagger that set her teeth on edge. He approached her window, his smirk carrying an air of superiority. "Morning, ma'am," he drawled. "This car doesn't look like it belongs to someone like you." Alexis's stomach twisted. She had heard these words before, veiled insults wrapped in authority. Every instinct told her to keep calm, but the frustration boiled inside her. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked evenly, keeping her hands visible on the wheel. "You tell me," he replied, leaning closer. "Why don't you step out of the vehicle? Let's have a look at your license and registration." Alexis complied, her movements deliberate. She handed over her documents, her gaze steady as she fought to suppress her anger. The officer scanned the papers, shaking his head with exaggerated skepticism. "Fake papers aren't uncommon these days," he remarked, tossing them back at her. "How exactly did you afford this car?" Before Alexis could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "Officer, is everything okay here?" Alexis turned to see a petite woman with chestnut brown hair and a determined expression walking toward them. Her voice was firm, her tone unyielding. The officer straightened, visibly annoyed. "Just routine, ma'am. No need to get involved." The woman didn't flinch. "Well, it doesn't look routine to me. It looks like you're giving her a hard time for no reason." The officer hesitated, his bravado faltering under the woman's unwavering stare. He handed Alexis's documents back and muttered something about staying safe before walking back to his patrol car. As the officer drove away, Alexis turned to the woman, her tension giving way to gratitude. "Thank you," Alexis said, her voice still shaky. The woman smiled warmly. "You look like you could use a little backup." My name is Lily Carter. Alexis Monroe, she replied, managing a small smile. Lily glanced at the building behind them. Are you here for the law firm? I know a few people who work there. Alexis hesitated. Could she trust this stranger? But something about Lily's presence felt genuine. Her kindness cutting through the wall Alexis had built around herself. Yes, Alexis admitted. I need someone who can handle a difficult case. Lily nodded thoughtfully. My friend Ethan is one of the attorneys there. He's one of the good ones. If you want, I can introduce you. Alexis felt a flicker of hope. Fragile, but undeniable. That would mean a lot. Thank you. The two women exchanged numbers, and Alexis drove home feeling lighter than she had in years. As she parked in front of her modest apartment building, the weight of the morning's events hit her. Her apartment, a small but tidy space in a struggling neighborhood, had been her sanctuary since her father's arrest. The mismatched furniture and faded curtains were reminders of a life that had been upended. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Alexis clutched the envelope and thought about the woman who had stood up for her. Lily's unexpected kindness had been a lifeline in a moment when she felt most alone. It reminded her of the belief her father always held, that good people still existed, even in a broken system. That night, Alexis stayed up late, reviewing the evidence again. The names and faces in the documents were a stark reminder of the uphill battle she faced. But Lily's intervention had planted a seed of determination in her. For the first time in years, Alexis allowed herself to imagine a future where justice was possible. She thought about her father's unwavering faith and how he would have wanted her to fight for what was right. As she closed the envelope, a new resolve took root in her heart. The next morning, Alexis met Lily outside the law firm. Lily greeted her with the same warm smile, her presence a quiet reassurance. Are you ready? Lily asked. Alexis nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. Together, they walked into the building, the envelope clutched tightly in Alexis's hands. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, she felt like she was not walking it alone. Alexis walked into the law firm beside Lily, her nerves coiled tightly. The building's polished floors and sleek glass walls felt cold, a stark contrast to the warmth Lily had shown her. Alexis clutched the envelope containing her father's case documents like a lifeline. Each step deeper into the firm's halls reminded her how much was at stake. Ethan should be free in a few minutes, Lily said, leading her to a small waiting area. He's the type who actually listens to people. That's rare in this world, especially in a place like this. Alexis gave a small nod, unsure how to respond. She lowered herself into one of the plush chairs, her back ramrod straight. She felt out of place here, her simple jeans and blazer contrasting sharply with the tailored suits bustling past her. Lily sat down across from her and studied Alexis's expression. Nervous? Alexis exhaled sharply, managing a tight smile. You could say that. Ethan is sharp but kind, Lily said. Just tell him the truth. He'll know what to do. The words should have reassured Alexis, but instead, they reminded her of the countless doors that had been slammed in her face over the years. Lawyers, journalists, and advocates had all told her the same thing. Your case is too risky. Your evidence is too thin. Your expectations are too high. Alexis Monroe? She looked up to see a man in his early 30s with dark hair and an open expression. He wore a crisp suit, but his smile softened the intimidating edge. That's me, Alexis said, rising to her feet. Ethan Grant. He introduced himself, offering his hand. Lily has told me a little about you. Come on back, and we can talk. Alexis glanced at Lily, who gave her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, she followed Ethan to his office. Ethan's office was neat and unassuming, with shelves lined with law books and framed degrees on the walls. A small photo of Ethan with a dog sat on his desk, hinting at the life behind the polished professional. So, Lily said you have a case involving systemic corruption, Ethan began, leaning forward with a pen poised over a legal pad. Why don't you start by telling me what brought you here? Alexis hesitated. She had told her story so many times before, only to be met with polite disinterest or thinly veiled excuses. But something about Ethan's steady gaze encouraged her. My father was Thomas Monroe, she began, her voice firm despite the knot in her throat. He was convicted of embezzlement 10 years ago. It was Elias' setup. They wanted him out of the way because he refused to play along with a corrupt system. And when he wouldn't back down, they found a way to silence him. He died in prison. Ethan's pen stopped mid-note, and he looked up. I remember hearing about that case, he said, his voice thoughtful. It was messy, but I thought it was closed years ago. It was, Alexis said bitterly, because no one cared enough to fight for the truth. But I never stopped looking. She placed the envelope on the desk and slid it toward him. This is everything I've found. Emails, financial records, and internal memos that prove he was framed. And it wasn't just him. There are others' names, dates, entire networks. Ethan opened the envelope and began skimming the documents. His brow furrowed as he flipped through the pages, his focus sharp. This is substantial, he murmured. He looked up, his expression serious. If what you have here holds up, this isn't just about clearing your father's name. This could take down a lot of powerful people. That's the idea, Alexis said, her tone steely. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his pen tapping against the desk. You know this won't be easy, he said. The people involved won't go down without a fight. They'll dig into your life, discredit you, maybe even threaten you. They've already tried, Alexis replied. Her voice faltered slightly, but she pressed on. They vandalized my car, sent letters telling me to stay quiet. But I can't. I won't stop. Ethan studied her for a moment before nodding. Okay, he said. Let's start with the basics. I'll verify everything you've brought me and map out our next steps. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just a legal battle. It's a war, and wars have casualties. Alexis met his gaze, her jaw tight. I've lost too much already, she said. I'm not afraid to lose more. Ethan smiled faintly, impressed by her resolve. In that case, let's get to work. When Alexis left the firm, she felt both exhilarated and terrified. For the first time in years, someone had taken her seriously. But Ethan's warnings lingered in her mind. How much more could she lose before she reached the truth? As she walked to her car, she found Lily waiting by the entrance. How did it go? Lily asked, falling in a step beside her. He said he'll take the case, Alexis replied, her voice tinged with disbelief. That's great, Lily said, her smile brightening. I told you he's one of the good ones. Alexis glanced at Lily, her heart swelling with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't stepped in back there with that cop, I don't know what I would have done. Lily shrugged. Everyone deserves a little help sometimes. And something tells me you're worth it. Alexis smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her for the first time in years. I hope you're right. That night, Alexis sat in her apartment, the weight of the day pressing down on her. Her home was modest but comfortable, the kind of place that spoke to resilience and practicality. The walls were bare except for a framed photo of her parents on the shelf. She stared at the photo for a long time, her father's steady gaze seeming to reach across the years. I won't let them win, she whispered to the empty room. As she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Hang in there. You've got this. Alexis smiled faintly, setting the phone on her nightstand. She felt the stirring of something she hadn't dared to believe in for a long time. Hope. The early morning light filtered through Alexis's curtains as she sat at her kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. The rich aroma filled the air, but she barely tasted it. Her thoughts were consumed by the weight of the previous day. Ethan Grant, the lawyer Lily had introduced her to, had agreed to take her case a monumental step forward in her years-long quest for justice. Yet as much as the thought gave her hope, it also left her uneasy. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. This isn't just a legal battle. It's a war, and wars have casualties. The vibration of her phone broke the silence. She grabbed it quickly, half expecting another anonymous threat. Instead, it was a text from Ethan. Alexis, I've gone through the documents. Can you meet at noon? We need to talk. Her stomach nodded. A part of her feared he had found flaws in her evidence, cracks that might shatter everything she had worked so hard to gather. But she pushed the thought aside and replied, I'll be there. When Alexis arrived at Ethan's office, she found him poring over a large corkboard filled with pinned papers, highlighted lines, and connected strings. He turned to greet her, his expression serious but not discouraging. Thanks for coming, he said, motioning for her to sit. What did you find? Alexis asked, her voice steady but taut. Ethan leaned against his desk, arms crossed. First, let me say this. The evidence you've gathered is compelling. It paints a clear picture of corruption, bribes, and coercion. But there's a problem. It implicates people in high places. Very high places. Alexis frowned. You mean politicians? Not just politicians, Ethan said. Judges, business tycoons, law enforcement, some of them are household names. If we go after them, they're not just going to defend themselves. They're going to retaliate hard. I already know they'll fight back, Alexis replied. They've been fighting me for years. That's why I need someone like you, someone who knows how to handle them. Ethan nodded, impressed by her resolve. Okay, then we'll start with what we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. That means focusing on the financial trail. The emails you uncovered link bribes to specific transactions. If we can verify the authenticity of those documents, it's a strong foundation. And what about the rest of it? Alexis asked. That's where things get tricky, Ethan admitted. We'll need witnesses. People who were involved or who saw enough to corroborate your story. Without them, it's just paper against power. Alexis felt her chest tighten. Witnesses meant people who might be too scared to come forward. Still, she refused to let the weight of the challenge crush her. Then we find witnesses, she said firmly. Ethan smiled faintly. I thought you'd say that. I might have a lead on someone, a man named Miguel Santiago. He was a maintenance worker at one of the implicated companies. His name came up in some of the emails, but I don't think he was part of the corruption. If anything, he might have been an unwilling observer. Do you think he'll talk to us? Ethan hesitated. That depends. He's been keeping a low profile, likely out of fear. We'll need to approach him carefully. Alexis leaned forward, her determination unwavering. Then let's do it. Later that day, Alexis found herself in the passenger seat of Ethan's car as they drove to a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of town. The building was worn but tidy, with faded paint and patches of greenery struggling to grow along the walkways. This is it, Ethan said as they parked. Alexis followed him to an apartment on the second floor. Ethan knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. After a long pause, the door cracked open. Miguel Santiago peered out cautiously. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a wary expression. Mr. Santiago? Ethan said gently. My name is Ethan Grant. I'm an attorney, and this is Alexis Monroe. We'd like to talk to you about some information that could help us uncover corruption. May we come in? Miguel hesitated, his gaze darting between them. I don't want trouble, he said, his voice low. We're not here to cause you trouble, Alexis interjected, her tone soft but firm. We're here to stop the people who've been causing it. You've seen what they're capable of, haven't you? Miguel's grip on the door tightened, his shoulders tense. Finally, he sighed and opened it wider. Come in. The inside of Miguel's apartment was humble but clean. A small sofa and a coffee table dominated the living room, and the faint aroma of spices lingered in the air. Miguel gestured for them to sit, though he remained standing. What do you want from me? He asked, crossing his arms. Ethan pulled out copies of the emails. Your name appears here, tied to transactions involving one of the companies at the center of the corruption. We believe you might have witnessed something that could help us expose them. Miguel's eyes widened slightly as he scanned the documents. I didn't have anything to do with that, he said quickly. I just did my job and tried to stay out of the way. We believe you, Alexis said. But staying silent won't stop them. They destroyed my father's life, and they're still hurting people. You have a chance to make a difference. Miguel shook his head, his voice trembling. You don't understand. These people don't play fair. They'll ruin me. They'll ruin my family. Alexis stood, her gaze steady. I do understand. They've already ruined my family. They killed my father because he stood up to them. But I'm still here, fighting because I refuse to let them win. And you don't have to fight alone. We'll protect you. Miguel's expression softened, the weight of her words sinking in. He lowered himself into a chair, his head in his hands. I saw things, he admitted finally. Things I wish I hadn't. I'll tell you what I know, but I don't want my name out there unless it's absolutely necessary. Ethan nodded. We'll do everything we can to keep you safe. As Miguel began recounting his story, Alexis felt a flicker of triumph. It was only one step, but it was a step forward. That evening, Alexis returned to her apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she felt the possibility of justice inching closer. She sat by her window, staring at the city lights, and thought about Miguel. He had taken a risk by speaking up, just as she had, and like her, he was driven by the hope that the truth could prevail. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Good work today. We're on the right track." Alexis smiled faintly and replied, "Thank you. We'll get there." As she set the phone down, she whispered to herself, "One step at a time." The next morning, Alexis sat at her kitchen table, staring out the window at the gray clouds gathering above the city. The previous day's success in convincing Miguel Santiago to share his story felt like a fragile victory. She had seen too many moments of progress crushed by the weight of systemic corruption. Yet for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of something close to hope. Her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Meeting in my office at noon. I need to share what Miguel's testimony revealed." Alexis responded with a quick "I'll be there," and then pushed her chair back. She spent the next few hours pacing her small apartment, her nerves tangled. Her space, while modest, reflected her personality, a blend of practicality and determination. The walls were mostly bare, save for a single framed photo of her parents on her dresser. It was taken at a family picnic years ago. Her father, Thomas, had a wide, confident smile. Her mother, Evelyn, was laughing, her arm wrapped tightly around Alexis, who was grinning at the camera with carefree joy. That version of herself felt like a stranger now. When noon arrived, Alexis headed to Ethan's office, her footsteps purposeful despite the growing unease in her chest. Ethan greeted her with a nod as she stepped into his office. His corkboard, now covered in even more notes and diagrams, loomed behind him. He gestured for Alexis to sit, his expression more serious than usual. "I've been reviewing Miguel's testimony," Ethan began. "It corroborates a lot of what's in your documents. The bribes, the threats, the network structure, it all checks out. But it also adds a new layer." "What kind of layer?" Alexis asked, her voice steady despite her apprehension. Ethan picked up a file and handed it to her. "Names. Specifically, two key figures we hadn't identified before. One is a judge who dismissed critical evidence in your father's case. The other is a senior officer in the police department. Miguel overheard conversations between them and executives at Kane Industries, the company at the center of all this." Alexis flipped through the file, her breath catching as she read the names. The judge had been a pillar of her father's trial, the one who had coldly dismissed every piece of evidence that could have exonerated him. The officer, she realized with a sinking feeling, was Scott Turner, the same man who had harassed her in the parking lot just days ago. "They were part of it," Alexis said, her voice shaking with anger. "They weren't just complicit, they were architects." Ethan nodded grimly. "And they're still active. The judge is presiding over high-profile cases, and Turner is climbing the ranks. They're protected by layers of power, and exposing them won't be easy." "I don't care how hard it is," Alexis said, her voice firm. "We're going to take them down." Ethan gave her a small, encouraging smile. "That's what I like to hear. But we need to be cautious. Miguel's information makes him a target, and by extension, so are you." Alexis nodded, her jaw set. "I'm used to being a target." That evening, Alexis returned home, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't stop thinking about Scott Turner. The memory of his smirk as he questioned her, his arrogance as he assumed she didn't belong in her own car, fueled her resolve. She had spent years enduring the indignities of people, like him, men who wielded power with prejudice, who saw her as less than. But now, she had a chance to expose him for what he was. She was still lost in thought when the sound of shattering glass jolted her. She ran to her living room to find her front window broken, shards of glass glittering on the floor. Her heart raced as she saw a brick lying amidst the debris. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw an anonymous text. "Stay in your place. This is your only warning." Alexis's chest tightened, but the fear was quickly replaced by anger. She refused to let them intimidate her. Grabbing her phone, she called Ethan. "They're trying to scare me," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "But it's not going to work." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "Get to my office. Now. I'll call Lily and Miguel. We need to regroup." Minutes later, Alexis sat in Ethan's office, joined by Lily and Miguel. The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken worry. Ethan stood by the corkboard, his expression resolute. "They're escalating," Ethan said. "The broken window, the threats, it's a clear message. They know we're onto them, and they're trying to shut us down before we can act." "But that means we're getting to them," Lily said, her voice cutting through the tension. "If they weren't scared, they wouldn't bother with threats." Alexis nodded. "She's right. We're making progress, and that's why they're pushing back." Miguel, who had been silent until now, looked up. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy. "I knew this would be dangerous, but I didn't think they'd come after you like this." "This isn't your fault," Alexis said firmly. "They're doing this because they're desperate. It means we're on the right track." Ethan cleared his throat. "Desperation can make them dangerous. We need to be smart. Miguel, I've arranged for you to stay in a secure location until we're ready to take this public." Lily and Alexis, "You should avoid staying at your usual places for now." "I can stay with you," Lily offered, turning to Alexis. "Martha has a spare room. It'll be safer there." Alexis hesitated, her independent streak resisting the idea of leaning on someone else. But as she looked at her friends, she realized she wasn't alone in this fight. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do it." That night, Alexis settled into the guest room at Martha Sinclair's house. The retired journalist welcomed her warmly, offering tea and a reassuring smile. "You're brave, Alexis," Martha said as they sat together in the cozy living room. "But bravery doesn't mean you have to face everything alone. Remember, the strongest movements are built on solidarity." Alexis nodded, her thoughts lingering on her father. He had always believed in the power of community, even when the system betrayed him. As she prepared for bed, Alexis found herself staring out the window at the quiet street below. Despite the threats, she felt a growing sense of resolve. The people who had destroyed her family thought they could scare her into silence, but they had underestimated her strength. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself. "Not by a long shot." The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of Martha Sinclair's cozy living room, giving the space an almost ethereal glow. Alexis sat on the edge of the old floral couch, her hands curled around a mug of hot tea. The warmth seeped into her fingers, but it did little to thaw the tension in her chest. Martha sat across from her in a high-backed chair, her posture straight and commanding despite her age. She had a quiet strength about her, the kind that came from decades of standing firm against injustice. Alexis had learned from Lily that Martha was once an investigative journalist who had exposed local government corruption in her prime. Now, she seemed to take Alexis under her wing, offering her wisdom and a place to regroup. "They've rattled you," Martha said gently, breaking the silence. "That's what they're hoping for. But you've already shown them they underestimated you by not backing down." Alexis nodded slowly. "I keep telling myself that, but every time I think about the brick, the text, or the names Ethan uncovered, it's overwhelming." Martha leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Overwhelming, yes. Impossible? No. Let me tell you something I learned when I took on my first big case. Corruption doesn't thrive because it's strong, it thrives because good people are afraid to challenge it. But when enough good people stand together, the entire system begins to crack." The words settled over Alexis like a bomb, easing some of the tension in her shoulders. She sipped her tea, letting Martha's steady presence bolster her. A knock at the door startled them both. Martha rose and opened it to reveal Lily, her face flushed from the brisk morning air. She stepped inside, clutching her phone in one hand. "You're going to want to hear this," Lily said as she joined them in the living room. She handed her phone to Alexis. The screen displayed a video recording. Ethan's voice played over the grainy footage, explaining the connections between Kane Industries, Judge Wallace, and Officer Turner. The video had been uploaded anonymously, and the comment section was already flooded with reactions ranging from outrage to shock. "Where did this come from?" Alexis asked, her brow furrowing. Ethan uploaded it, Lily replied. He said it's time to start turning up the pressure. The more people know about what's happening, the harder it'll be for them to bury the truth. Alexis's stomach flipped. The exposure was necessary, but it came with risks. If they see this, they'll retaliate harder, she said, her voice laced with concern. They probably will, Martha said. But public attention is a powerful shield. It's harder for them to act in the shadows when everyone's watching. Alexis nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we'll make sure everyone is watching. Later that day, Alexis, Lily, and Ethan met at his office to plan their next steps. The court board had grown even more crowded with notes and evidence, a visual representation of the tangled web they were trying to unravel. Releasing the video was a bold move, Alexis said, crossing her arms as she faced Ethan. But bold doesn't mean safe. I know, Ethan admitted, his expression serious. But we can't play it safe anymore. The public needs to see what we're dealing with. And the more people we have on our side, the harder it'll be for them to silence us. What's the response been so far? Lily asked. Ethan gestured to his computer. The video's already gaining traction. Journalists are reaching out, and a few activists want to amplify the message. But we need more than that. We need a credible ally, someone who can push this case forward on a larger scale. Like a federal investigator? Alexis asked. Exactly, Ethan said. And I think I've found one. Mark Davis. He's been pursuing corruption cases for years, and his name came up in connection with a case involving Kane Industries about 5 years ago. He didn't get far then, but this evidence could give him the leverage he needs. Alexis nodded thoughtfully. How do we get him to listen? I've already contacted his office, Ethan said. He agreed to meet with us tomorrow. Alexis felt a surge of both hope and apprehension. This could be what we need, she said. But we have to be prepared for anything. The following day, the group met Agent Mark Davis in a nondescript federal building. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a calm demeanor and a piercing gaze that seemed to take in everything at once. I've reviewed the materials Mr. Grant sent me, Davis said as they sat around a conference table. If what you're alleging is true, this isn't just corruption, it's an institutional rot that could implicate half the city's leadership. It is true, Alexis said, her voice steady. And it's been allowed to grow because people were too scared to fight back. But we're not scared anymore. Davis's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. I appreciate your courage, Ms. Monroe, but I need you to understand what you're walking into. These people are powerful, and they'll stop at nothing to protect themselves. We're aware of the risks, Ethan said, but we're also aware of what's at stake. If we don't do this, they'll keep hurting people. Davis nodded slowly. All right, I'll take the case, but I'll need more than what you've provided so far. Witnesses, corroborating evidence, anything that can stand up in court. We have a witness, Alexis said. Miguel Santiago. He's already provided a statement, and he's willing to testify if we can guarantee his safety. I'll arrange protection for him, Davis said, but I'll need more than one witness. Keep digging. The more we have, the stronger our case will be. As they left the building, Alexis felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. They had taken a significant step forward, but the path ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. That evening, Alexis returned to Martha's house, her thoughts heavy. She stood on the porch, staring out at the quiet street as the sun dipped below the horizon. Lily joined her, leaning against the railing. You okay? Lily asked. I don't know, Alexis admitted. Sometimes it feels like we're just waiting for the next attack. Lily placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're doing something incredible, Alexis. It's not easy, and it's not safe, but it's worth it. People are starting to see the truth because of you. Alexis nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. I couldn't do it without all of you, she said quietly. As the stars began to appear, Alexis allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She thought of her father, of the justice he deserved, and of the courage she had found through the kindness of those around her. This fight isn't over, she said, her voice steady. But we're going to win. The next morning, Alexis woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. She blinked against the soft light filtering through Martha's curtains, the warmth of the bed a stark contrast to the cold tension that gripped her stomach. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something told her it was important. "Hello," she said, her voice still rough from sleep. "Ms. Monroe, this is Agent Davis. We need to talk." "There's been a development," he said without preamble. Alexis sat up quickly, her pulse quickening. "What kind of development?" "Not over the phone," Davis replied. "Come to my office as soon as you can. Bring Mr. Grant and Ms. Carter." "I'll be there," Alexis said, already swinging her legs out of bed. An hour later, Alexis, Ethan, and Lily sat across from Davis in his austere office. The walls were bare except for a single framed certificate, and the desk was piled with folders and papers. Davis's expression was unreadable, but his tone carried a weight of urgency. "We've had a breach," Davis began. "The evidence you provided, it's good, but someone leaked the investigation's existence to the wrong people. My team intercepted chatter suggesting that Turner and his associates know we're closing in. They're moving fast to cover their tracks." Alexis's stomach sank. "What does that mean for us?" "It means they'll escalate," Davis said bluntly. "And we've already seen signs of it. Miguel Santiago's location was compromised." "What?" Ethan said sharply. "Is he okay?" "He's safe for now," Davis assured them. "We've relocated him to a more secure facility. But this shows how far they're willing to go to protect themselves. You all need to be extremely careful from here on out." Alexis clenched her fists in her lap, her mind racing. Miguel had already risked so much to help them, and now his life was in danger. "We can't let this stop us," Alexis said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "If anything, it proves we're on the right track." Davis nodded. "Agreed. But we need to stay one step ahead. Keep digging for more evidence, and bring me anything you find. The more we have, the harder it'll be for them to hide." That evening, Alexis, Ethan, and Lily huddled in Ethan's office, poring over documents and making calls. The tension in the room was palpable, but so was their determination. "We're running out of time," Ethan said, rubbing his temples. "If they're already trying to cover their tracks, we need to hit them fast and hard with something irrefutable." "What about the judge?" Lily asked. "Wallace is a key player in this. If we can connect him directly to the bribes, it could blow the whole thing wide open." Alexis flipped through her files, her eyes scanning for the judge's name. "There's a series of transactions here," she said, pointing to a highlighted section. "It's vague, but it looks like payments funneled through a shell company linked to Kane Industries. If we can trace the money back to Wallace, it's game over." "That's a big if," Ethan said, "but it's worth a shot. I'll call in a forensic accountant to help." Alexis leaned back in her chair, exhaustion weighing on her. Every step forward felt like climbing a mountain, but she couldn't stop now. Too many people were counting on her. The next day, Alexis found herself back at Martha's house, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread out before her. Martha entered the room, carrying a tray of tea and biscuits. "You look like you haven't slept," Martha said, setting the tray down. Alexis managed a faint smile. "Sleep feels like a luxury right now." Martha sat across from her, her wise eyes studying Alexis carefully. "You're carrying a lot on your shoulders," she said gently. "But you're not alone in this. Remember that." Alexis nodded, her chest tightening with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without all of you. I've spent so many years fighting this alone. It's strange having people I can rely on." "That's the power of community," Martha said. "It's what they fear the most. People standing together, refusing to be silenced." The words settled in Alexis's heart, a steadying force against the chaos swirling around her. That night, Ethan called with news. "The forensic accountant found something," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "There's a direct payment from the shell company to Judge Wallace's campaign fund. It's buried deep, but it's there." "That's huge," Alexis said, her heart racing. "It is," Ethan agreed. "But it's not enough on its own. We need someone to confirm the transaction was tied to the bribes." "What about the accountant?" "He's willing to testify, but we'll need to protect him. This is dangerous territory." Alexis exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. "Then we protect him, whatever it takes." The following morning, Alexis joined Ethan and Lily at Davis's office to share the new findings. Davis's expression remained stoic, but there was a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "This is good," he said. "Very good. But you're right, this accountant's testimony is crucial. I'll arrange for his protection, but we need to be ready to move fast. Once this hit, the backlash will be swift and severe." As they left the office, Alexis felt a mix of pride and dread. They were closer than ever to exposing the truth, but the risks were growing by the hour. Walking down the street with Lily, Alexis glanced at her friend. "Do you ever feel like we're walking on a tightrope?" Lily chuckled softly. "All the time. But you've got the balance for it, Alexis. And we're all here to catch you if you fall." Alexis smiled faintly, her resolve strengthening. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, she believed they might actually win. Alexis's phone buzzed incessantly as she paced back and forth in Martha's living room. Each message, each call, felt like another crack in the fragile ground beneath her feet. The forensic accountant's testimony had shifted the game in their favor, but the repercussions were immediate. News of the case had leaked to the media overnight, and the corrupt network was pushing back harder than ever. "They're not holding back," Alexis muttered, glancing at the latest text from Ethan. "Another journalist contacted me. The story is spreading, but so is the danger. Be on guard." She set the phone down, her chest tightening. Even Martha, usually calm and collected, wore a worried expression as she sat across the room, sorting through a stack of news clippings. "You've rattled the right cages," Martha said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "But that means they'll do everything in their power to silence you." Before Alexis could respond, the front door burst open, and Lily rushed in, her face pale. "Turner's men are watching Ethan's office," she said breathlessly, "and they've been sniffing around Miguel's old neighborhood. We need to act fast." Alexis felt her stomach drop. "How's Miguel? Is he still safe?" "For now," Lily said. "Davis moved him again, but they're getting closer. If they find him—" "They won't," Alexis said firmly, cutting her off. "We won't let them." An hour later, Alexis, Ethan, and Lily convened at a secluded cafe on the outskirts of the city. The location was chosen deliberately to avoid prying eyes, but Alexis couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed darker, every glance from a stranger more suspicious. "We need to stay ahead of them," Ethan said, his voice low. "The accountant's testimony gives us leverage, but it's not enough to bring them down completely. We need more." "More witnesses?" Alexis asked, already bracing for the answer. Ethan nodded. "Exactly. We need to prove that this wasn't an isolated incident. We need a pattern." Alexis exhaled sharply. "That means more people like Miguel. People who saw the corruption firsthand and are willing to talk." Lily frowned, her arms crossed. "It's not just about finding them. It's about convincing them it's worth the risk. After what happened to Miguel, who's going to want to step forward?" Alexis leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "Then we show them it is worth it. We show them that standing together is the only way to take these people down." Later that night, Alexis returned to Martha's house, exhaustion weighing heavily on her. She sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The neighborhood seemed peaceful on the surface, but she knew that peace was fragile. Martha entered the room, carrying 2 cups of tea. She set one down in front of Alexis and took a seat beside her. "You're carrying a lot on your shoulders," Martha said gently. "But don't forget you don't have to do this alone." Alexis gave a small, tired smile. "I know, but sometimes it feels like no matter how much progress we make, it's never enough." Martha placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Progress isn't always linear, Alexis. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's painful, but every step forward matters, no matter how small it feels." Alexis nodded, letting the words sink in. "Thank you," she said softly. The next morning, Alexis and Lily began reaching out to potential witnesses. It was slow, grueling work with more rejections than successes. Fear had a strong grip on the people they contacted, and convincing them to step forward felt like an impossible task. But then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former secretary at Kane Industries, Rachel Turner, responded to their inquiries. She had worked closely with senior executives and claimed to have knowledge of fraudulent contracts and bribes. "She's scared," Lily said after their first phone call with Rachel. "But she wants to talk." She said it's been eating at her for years. Alexis felt a spark of hope. "Then we protect her, just like we're protecting Miguel. She's our next key witness." The following day, Alexis, Lily, and Ethan met Rachel at a quiet park on the outskirts of the city. Rachel was a petite woman in her early 40s, her nervous demeanor evident in the way she constantly glanced over her shoulder. "Thank you for meeting us," Alexis said gently, trying to ease Rachel's tension. Rachel nodded, her hands clutching a folder tightly. "I don't know how much help I'll be," she said, her voice trembling. "But I couldn't keep quiet anymore. Not after everything I saw." "Every piece of information helps," Ethan assured her. "We're not just building a case, we're building a movement. Your voice matters." Rachel hesitated before handing the folder to Ethan. "These are internal memos, contracts, and emails. They show how money was funneled to judges, politicians, and police officials. I kept copies just in case." "You've done the right thing," Alexis said, her voice firm. "This will make a difference." Rachel gave a small, uncertain smile. "I hope so." That evening, Alexis returned to Martha's house feeling a cautious optimism. Rachel's testimony and documents were a major step forward, but the weight of their fight still loomed large. As she sat by the window, she received a text from Ethan. "Rachel's evidence is solid. We're getting closer." Alexis stared at the message for a long moment, her mind racing. She thought of her father, of Miguel, of Rachel, and of everyone who had been hurt by the system they were fighting to dismantle. "This is for all of them," she whispered to herself. But just as hope began to bloom, the retaliation came. Early the next morning, Martha woke Alexis with urgent news. "There was a break-in at Ethan's office," Martha said, her voice tight with worry. "They took files, computers, everything." Alexis felt a chill run down her spine. The network was striking back harder than ever, and the stakes had just risen even higher. The sunlight streamed through the curtains of Martha's living room, but the warmth it brought did little to dispel the tension hanging in the air. Alexis sat stiffly on the couch, clutching her phone. The news of the break-in at Ethan's office had shaken her deeply. All the evidence they had painstakingly gathered was at risk. Across the room, Lily paced back and forth, her arms crossed tightly. "How did they even know where to strike?" she said, her voice sharp. "We've been so careful." "Not careful enough," Martha said from her seat by the window. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just measured. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "This tells us something, though. They're afraid. People like them don't make bold moves like this unless they're desperate." Alexis shook her head. "Desperate or not, they just dealt us a major blow. If they destroyed those files," she let her words trail off, unable to finish the thought. Just then her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "They didn't get everything," Ethan said the moment she answered. His voice was tight, but resolute. "I made backups of the most critical files. They might have slowed us down, but they didn't stop us." Relief coursed through Alexis. "Thank God. What about your office? Was anything else taken?" "They ransacked the place," Ethan said grimly. "It's unusable for now, but I'm already working on a secure location where we can regroup. We'll meet there later today." Alexis relayed the update to Lily and Martha, who both seemed to relax slightly. "They might think they've silenced us," Alexis said, her voice firm. "But we're still standing. And now, we make them regret this." Later that afternoon, the group gathered at the new secure location Ethan had arranged, a quiet, unmarked workspace on the outskirts of the city. It was a far cry from his sleek office, but it served its purpose. Ethan stood by a whiteboard, maps and notes pinned to the walls around him. "We're at a turning point," he said, addressing the group. "The break-in was a setback, but it also confirmed something important. We're getting to them. And that means we need to push harder." Rachel Turner, their newest ally, sat at the table with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been through the files I gave you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "There's more in there than I realized: detailed contracts, payment schedules. It connects Kane Industries directly to Judge Wallace and Officer Turner. If we get this into the right hands, it could blow their entire operation wide open." "What about Miguel?" Alexis asked, "Is he still safe?" Davis, who had joined them at the meeting, nodded. "He's secure, but the threats are increasing. Turner's men are scouring the city for him. We need to act quickly before they find a way to silence him permanently." Alexis clenched her fists. The stakes were higher than ever, and every second felt like a race against time. The next morning, the group began their most ambitious push yet. With Davis's guidance, they prepared to take their case to the federal court. They compiled the evidence, organized the witness testimonies, and worked tirelessly to ensure their presentation was airtight. For Alexis, the process was grueling. Late nights turned into early mornings, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. But she refused to let it break her. Every time doubt crept in, she thought of her father, his strength, his unwavering belief in justice, and it gave her the courage to keep going. As the team worked, the opposition escalated their tactics. Anonymous threats flooded Alexis's phone, and Davis reported increased surveillance around key locations. "They're desperate," Davis said during one of their strategy meetings. "But desperation makes them dangerous. Be vigilant, and don't let your guard down." Despite the risks, the group pressed on. Their resolve only grew stronger with each challenge they faced. One evening, after a long day of preparation, Alexis sat outside Martha's house, staring up at the stars. Lily joined her, handing her a mug of tea. "You're carrying the weight of this like it's all on you," Lily said softly. "But it's not. We're all in this together." Alexis looked at her friend, her eyes glistening. "It just feels like if we fail, it's my fault. This fight started with my father, with what they did to him. I owe it to him to see this through." Lily placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And you will, but you don't have to carry it alone. We're here, Alexis, every step of the way." Alexis nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you for everything." The next day, the group faced a critical test, a preliminary hearing to determine whether their case had enough evidence to proceed to trial. Alexis, Ethan, Lily, Rachel, and Davis stood together as the judge reviewed their materials. The hearing was tense, with the opposition's legal team attempting to discredit their evidence at every turn. But Alexis held her ground, delivering a powerful statement about the corruption she had uncovered and the toll it had taken on innocent lives. When the judge finally ruled in their favor, allowing the case to move forward, the group erupted in quiet celebration. It was a small victory, but it was enough to reignite their hope. That night, back at Martha's house, Alexis allowed herself a moment of reflection. The fight was far from over, but they had taken a significant step forward. As she gazed out the window, she thought about all the people who had stood by her: Lily, Ethan, Martha, Miguel, Rachel, and even Davis. Their courage and kindness had carried her through the darkest moments, reminding her that she was never truly alone. "This isn't just my fight," she whispered to herself. "It's ours, and together we'll win." The federal courthouse stood tall and imposing, its marble facade gleaming in the morning sun. Alexis adjusted the lapels of her blazer, her heart pounding as she joined Ethan, Lily, Rachel, and Davis on the courthouse steps. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice steady but low. "Everything we've worked for comes down to this moment." Alexis nodded, taking a deep breath. The weight of the case pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she knew she wasn't carrying it alone. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. On one side sat the opposition's legal team, led by representatives from Kane Industries, Judge Wallace, and Officer Turner. Their expressions were composed, but their eyes carried a glint of desperation. Alexis, Ethan, and Davis sat at their table, stacks of evidence and documents neatly arranged before them. Rachel sat nearby, her nervous energy palpable. Miguel had been granted protection and would testify remotely, his voice shielded, but his story crucial. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. "This court is now in session," the clerk announced. The morning unfolded with meticulous presentations. Ethan began by laying out the foundation of their case, walking the court through the financial records and emails that connected Kane Industries to bribes, fraudulent contracts, and judicial interference. "Your Honor," Ethan said, his voice clear and commanding, This evidence demonstrates a systemic abuse of power designed to protect those who should be held accountable. We are here to ensure that justice prevails. The opposition's lead attorney rose, his tone smooth and practiced. While the plaintiff's evidence is detailed, it lacks context. These records are circumstantial at best and do not prove intent. Alexis's jaw tightened. She had expected them to downplay the evidence, but hearing it dismissed so casually stung. As the day progressed, the testimony began. Miguel's voice came through the courtroom speakers, steady but tinged with fear. "I saw the contracts," he said. "I overheard conversations between executives at Kane Industries and Judge Wallace. They discussed ensuring rulings would favor the company in exchange for payouts." The opposition's lawyer attempted to discredit him, painting him as a disgruntled employee. But Miguel held firm, his courage shining through. Next, Rachel took the stand. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the edge of the podium. "I worked at Kane Industries for 10 years, she began. "I filed the contracts, processed the payments, and watched as bribes were funneled through shell companies. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared. Speaking out meant losing everything." Her voice faltered, but she pressed on. "I'm here now because people like Alexis Monroe gave me the courage to do the right thing. This corruption has gone unchecked for too long." Alexis felt a swell of pride as Rachel stepped down, her testimony adding another layer of credibility to their case. When it was Alexis's turn, she rose from her seat and walked to the witness stand. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she began. "My name is Alexis Monroe," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "My father, Thomas Monroe, was a man of integrity. He believed in justice, even when the system turned against him. He was wrongfully convicted and died in prison for a crime he didn't commit." Her gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of the judge and jury. "For years, I fought to uncover the truth not just for my father, but for everyone who has suffered because of this corrupt system. The evidence you've seen today is not just paperwork. It represents lives ruined, families destroyed, and justice denied." As she continued, Alexis's voice grew stronger, filled with a quiet but unyielding determination. "This fight isn't just about holding individuals accountable. It's about sending a message that no one is above the law, that justice, no matter how delayed, is worth fighting for." When she stepped down, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. The opposition's team launched their rebuttal with vigor, attacking the credibility of the witnesses and casting doubt on the evidence. But their arguments lacked the weight of the truth. As the day stretched into evening, the closing arguments began. Ethan delivered a powerful summation, tying together every piece of evidence and testimony. "Corruption thrives in darkness," he said, his voice ringing through the courtroom. "But today, we've shone a light on it. The evidence is clear. The witnesses are credible, and the truth is undeniable. Now, it's time for justice to prevail." The opposition's attorney countered, but the desperation in his voice was evident. When the session ended, the judge announced that a ruling would be delivered in 2 days. The group left the courthouse together, exhaustion etched into their faces. Outside, the media swarmed, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. Ethan shielded Rachel, while Alexis walked forward with her head held high. "We'll wait for the ruling," she said to the reporters, her voice calm but firm. "But we're confident in the strength of our case. The truth is on our side." That night, back at Martha's house, Alexis sat on the porch with Lily. The stars above were bright, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions inside her. "You were incredible today," Lily said, handing her a cup of tea. Alexis gave a small smile. "I just hope it's enough. For my dad. For everyone." "It is," Lily said firmly. "And even if it's not perfect, you've already changed so much. People are listening. People are paying attention. That's because of you." Alexis nodded, letting the words sink in. The fight wasn't over, but they had come so far. 2 days later, the group gathered in the courthouse for the judge's ruling. The tension in the air was palpable as the judge delivered her verdict. "The evidence presented is compelling and credible. This court finds sufficient cause to proceed to trial against the defendants. Let it be clear justice demands accountability, and this case will proceed in pursuit of the truth. Relief and triumph washed over Alexis as the courtroom erupted in whispers. It was only the beginning, but it was a monumental step forward. Outside, the group stood together, the weight of their journey reflected in their faces. Alexis looked at each of them, Lily, Ethan, Rachel, and even Davis, and felt a surge of gratitude. "This is for all of us," she said quietly. "And it's just the beginning." The morning after the judge's ruling, Alexis sat on Martha's porch, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in hues of gold and crimson. The air was crisp, carrying a hint of renewal. For the first time in years, Alexis felt a deep sense of peace, not because the battle was over, but because she finally believed they could win. Lily stepped outside, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "You're up early," she said, handing one to Alexis. "I couldn't sleep," Alexis admitted, taking a sip. "I keep thinking about what's next. The trial, the media attention, the backlash. It's overwhelming, but it's also exciting." Lily sat beside her, her expression thoughtful. "It's okay to feel both, you know. What you've done is huge, but it's also heavy. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." Alexis smiled faintly, glancing at her friend. "I know. It's just, I've been fighting this for so long. I'm not sure I remember what it's like to just be." "You'll figure it out," Lily said with a grin. "And until you do, you've got all of us to remind you." As the days passed, the case gained national attention. News outlets ran exposés on the corruption Alexis and her team had uncovered, and public support grew steadily. Messages of encouragement flooded Alexis's phone and email, a stark contrast to the threats she had once received. One afternoon, Alexis met Ethan and Davis at the courthouse to finalize preparations for the upcoming trial. "Public opinion is on our side," Davis said, glancing at the growing crowd of protesters gathered outside. "That's going to make it harder for the defense to spin this." "They're still going to try," Ethan said, flipping through a stack of papers. "But we have the facts, the witnesses, and the evidence. They're running out of places to hide." "And if they try to fight dirty?" Alexis asked. "We'll be ready," Davis said firmly. The trial itself was grueling. Over the course of several weeks, Alexis and her team faced relentless cross-examinations, surprise motions, and attempts to discredit their witnesses. But through it all, they stood firm. Miguel's testimony was a pivotal moment, his courage shining through even under intense scrutiny. Rachel's evidence proved to be the linchpin of the case. The contracts and email she had preserved painted an undeniable picture of collusion and corruption, tying Kane Industries, Judge Wallace, and Officer Turner directly to the fraudulent activities. When it was Alexis's turn to take the stand again, she spoke with a quiet but unwavering conviction. "This isn't just about my father," she said. "It's about every person who has been silenced, every family that has been torn apart, and every injustice that has gone unchecked. We're here because the truth matters, justice matters, and it's time for those who abuse their power to be held accountable." The jury deliberated for 2 days before delivering their verdict. Guilty on multiple counts for Kane Industries executives, Judge Wallace and Officer Turner. The courtroom erupted in applause, but Alexis simply sat in stunned silence, her hands trembling as the words sank in. It was over, or at least this part of it was. That evening, the team gathered at Martha's house to celebrate. The living room was filled with laughter and a sense of relief. Martha had insisted on baking her famous apple pie, and Lily brought homemade lemonade. Even Davis, usually reserved, cracked a rare smile. "To justice," Ethan said, raising his glass. "To resilience," Martha added. "To hope," Alexis said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. They clinked their glasses, the simple gesture carrying the weight of everything they had endured. In the weeks that followed, Alexis found herself reflecting on how far she had come. The victory had brought her a sense of closure, but it also opened new doors. She decided to channel her experience into something that could help others. With the support of her team, Alexis launched an organization dedicated to exposing corruption and advocating for systemic reform. They called it the Monroe Initiative in honor of her father's legacy. Rachel joined as a key organizer, using her firsthand knowledge to guide their efforts. Miguel became a public advocate, speaking about the importance of courage in the face of fear. Ethan provided legal expertise, while Lily managed outreach and community engagement. Even Martha contributed, offering her journalistic instincts and wisdom. One afternoon, Alexis stood on the balcony of their new office, overlooking the bustling city below. The sound of construction echoed in the distance, mingling with the chatter of people on the sidewalks. Thinking about the next fight? Lily asked, stepping beside her. Alexis smiled. Always. But for the first time, I'm not afraid of it. You shouldn't be, Lily said, because you've shown the world what one person can do when they refuse to give up. Alexis turned to her friend, her expression softening. Not just one person, all of us. I couldn't have done this alone. Lily grinned. Good thing you didn't have to. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a warm glow, Alexis felt a deep sense of gratitude. The fight for justice would never truly end, but she was ready for it. For her father, for the people who had stood by her, for those who couldn't fight for themselves. This wasn't just the end of her story, it was the beginning of something much bigger. As the screen fades to black, Alexis's determined face lingers in your mind, a symbol of courage and resilience. Her journey reminds us all that even in the darkest moments, the truth can shine through, and when we stand together, real change is possible. If this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you hope, we invite you to join us in sharing its message. Subscribe to our channel, Real Life Stories New, where we bring you powerful tales of ordinary people fighting extraordinary battles for justice, kindness, and change. Together, we can uncover the truths that matter and amplify the voices that deserve to be heard. Let's continue building a brighter tomorrow, one story at a time. Don't forget to hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe. We're on the verge of reaching 10,000 subscribers, and your support makes all the difference. Let's make a difference together.